Building BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa form the bloc of emerging economies. As they struggle with budget deficits, is BRICS still relevant? And what can they achieve globally? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. For several years now, the most talked about trend in the global economy has been the rise of developing markets. At the centre of the conversation, BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Some economists expected these countries to lead the world to new economic heights. But as the BRICS bloc met for its 8th summit in India's state of Goa, those hopes appeared to be fading. Most of the countries involved are struggling to deal with slowing economies. They must find ways to forge closer business and trade ties. But there are other concerns to be addressed too, including national security and the threat posed by terrorism.
We count on the BRICS Business Council to work with us to achieve our common aim of strengthening mutual trade, enhancing business opportunities, building investment linkages, promoting innovation, and removing bottlenecks to intra-BRICS commerce.
Russia will continue contributing to bringing the economies of the 5 states closer to create conditions for new business projects. It invites all the business communicators of the BRICS countries to work on projects and our partnership ties with Russian companies. We continue supporting the activities of the Business Council as an important tool for fostering mutual beneficial partnership of the BRICS countries.
The BRIC acronym was coined in 2001 by US investment bank Goldman Sachs to describe the world's 4 largest emerging markets at the time: Brazil, Russia, India and China. They began holding formal meetings in 2006. As developing countries, their aim was to play a larger role in the world economy. In 2011, the 4 countries wanted to expand their economic reach to the African continent, so they invited South Africa to join their fold. BRICS nations represent nearly half the world's population and around 17% of global trade. Let's take a look at the countries and where their individual economies stand. China is the world's 2nd largest economy after the US, with more than $11 trillion. But its economy is growing at its slowest pace in 25 years. India has the fastest growing economy out of the 5 countries. It stands at more than $2 trillion. It also has one of the world's highest number of people living in poverty. Brazil is Latin America's largest economy at around $1.35 trillion, but it's been hit hard by corruption and the global fall in oil prices. Unemployment and inflation are both hovering at around 10%. Russia's economy is just over $1 trillion. Sanctions imposed by Western countries after Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 have slowed trade. South Africa's economy is by far the smallest and was estimated at $327 billion in 2015. Unemployment is high, with more than 1 in 5 of its population without work. Well, let's bring in our guests now to discuss more about BRICS. In New Delhi, Sriram Chaulia, Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs. In Nairobi, Ali Khan Sachu, Emerging Markets Economist. And in London, Anastasia Nezvetilova, Director of City Political Economy Research Centre at City University in London. Welcome to all of you. Sriram, if I can start with you, because you're there in India where this summit has been taking place. What's come out of it?
I think substantial agreements have been signed, and there is a momentum to build upon the institutional successes of the past, like the new development bank and the contingency reserve arrangement, and also new ideas, innovative ideas. We are now moving towards setting up a BRICS credit rating agency to challenge the triopoly of the Western rating agencies. There is broad-based cooperation from agriculture to industry to tourism to youth, culture, people-to-people contacts, improvement of intra-BRICS trade by lowering customs barriers, and also improving intra-BRICS investment flows. So even though the climate is somewhat gloomy in some of the BRICS countries, India as the host is taking the lead because it has the momentum behind it with the highest, fastest growth among all the member countries, and with the dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there is a push to broad-base BRICS and make it really relevant, not just in the eyes of the world, but for the people of these 5 countries who, as you said, constitute nearly 45% of the world's population and who have lots of developmental aspirations. It's only by coming together, especially when the economic chips are down, that BRICS can demonstrate that there is something to be gained through multilateral cooperation, which will bring back developmental benefits to the poor in our societies.
Ali Khan Satu there in Nairobi. As Sriram said, BRICS represents 43% of the world's population, 23% of the world's GDP. But how relevant is it?
That's a really interesting question, Laura. I think the salad days, the low-hanging fruit, when the BRICS name was created, the phenomenon that we saw for the last 10 years, the easy pickings, those days are over. And each of these individual countries, whether it's Brazil, Russia, India seems to be in the best position, China, lack of credibility about the economic data, South Africa, major governance challenges. The finance ministers just come under attack, from supporters of the president. So I think, it's no longer that mythical thing where it was a rising tide floating all boats. I think there's serious challenges within these countries. And more than that, I think there's so much misalignment now. Prime Minister Modi is talking of Pakistan being the mothership of terrorism. Pakistan and China are very close together now. China sees the Gwadar port as its way to escape the noose that has been tightened around it in the South China Sea. So I think, we're no longer in that one tide lifts all. I think we got separate agendas. I saw that the document that came out of Goa had more than 100 points. I mean, I've no idea how they're going to enforce all of those. They are good points. I like the idea of the BRICS Bank, but this is, in a way, it feels like yesterday's story. It feels they've got to get their own house in order before they start, talking about these big dreams. I really think there are challenges at home that they've got to get on with, and this was just an opportunity to come, look good, and say it's all great amongst the 5 of us, but it isn't.
Anastasia, 2 very different points of views being presented there. I mean, given the challenges that Ali raises, does Sriram have a point by saying this is now an especially important time for the countries to come together?
It might be an important time, I would agree. Internationally and globally, the challenge of economic uncertainty and potential political instability domestically and in international security arena are quite vast. But I would agree with Ali in the sense that I see much more divergence within the BRICS group than convergence on a common point of view, a common approach to institutional governance, or even a common paradigm for this global development, or an alternative to the existing multilateral, or as they see it, US-dominated international order. In a sense, each one of them has, and especially the large economies, Russia, China, to a lesser extent India and Brazil, they have formed their foreign economic agenda as an alternative or counteraction to existing American or Western economic interests. But it's a very reactive strategy. It doesn't really carry with it anything substantial forward. In terms of real projects, the International Development Bank or the BRICS Development Bank is only one such construction, and it really came into the existence only a year ago. It did issue 1 green bond, but to be honest, it just fits into quite an overpopulated topography of international financial institutions, and it's useful to have it. But I don't see how it can really provide what the BRICS economies or the BRICS leaders think they are going to build, an alternative economic order or political order. It might be an alternative political universe or an alternative economic sphere of interaction, but I'm not sure this is a seriously global force that can challenge the status quo and deal with common challenges.
Sriram, not a serious global player. What do you make of that?
I think BRICS is still a work in progress, and there have been some sharp bends and curves where some of them have faltered. But end of the day, the institutional progress is phenomenal. I mean, just imagine a situation where we are talking about alternative paradigms even to human development. The BRICS Wellness Index is being formulated, which will highlight the importance of traditional medicine, for example, rooted in our ancient civilizations of all these countries. So there are a lot of new ideas out there. They were looking at trading in their local currencies. They are looking at also involving outreach as form of outreach other neighboring countries. For example, this evening, Prime Minister Modi is hosting an outreach summit between the BRICS heads of state and heads of government of BIMSTEC, which is the Bay of Bengal initiative, which involves Myanmar and Thailand and some other South Asian countries. So there is a lot going on in terms of the regional integration or sub-regional integration. And I think these are positives, and we should not ignore these. Of course, we have problems, and there are corruption scandals, and there's economic slowdown and commodity slump and fall in demand. Yes, I'm not denying those. But what I'm trying to say is that, at a time of crisis, we need to really show our character. We're going to tough it out, and I think the agreements are so substantial in Goa at the summit that I'm pretty sure the follow-up, India has done 115 background meetings prior to this summit over a 6 to 8 month period, and all these are coming to fruition, and I see a brighter future for us because the fundamentals are still there.
Okay, can you just give us some concrete examples of how these meetings have come how they've come into fruition? I'm interested to know what concrete examples we've got that demonstrate BRICS' collectivism. And we've got the new development bank, but what else?
Well, they have now signed an agricultural cooperation and research institution that's going to come about. They're also looking at, there are many means by which we can ease non-tariff barriers. The intra-BRICS trade is around $300 billion, and it can go up to $1 trillion if we can remove some of these. They're looking at improving understanding of investment climates in each of these countries. They have also forged a common front on terror. So although, there are divergences, there will be narrow nationalistic urges, but the idea of this forum, why it perseveres, why we have not thrown away the baby with the bathwater, is because it brings some value. It brings economic and security value to its members. And at the end of the day, there are multiple paradigms which are alternative to the Western view, which are emerging. There is a youth forum, there is a women's forum. If you look at the substance of what's happening on the ground, below the level of the summit, you really see the dynamism from the ground up, where people have taken a stakes in this. There is a BRICS identity that's being formed.
Okay.
We're completing 10 years, and I don't see how this institution is going to fade away or just fall aside.
Ali, that's a fair point, isn't it? BRICS does offer an alternative paradigm to Western hegemony.
I think that's a fair point. They've been offering it for a number of years. I don't know what exactly that paradigm is beyond, beyond what they've shown me. They haven't shown me anything really new. It's typically been an authoritarian state-type economic model. And if I look around from whether it's China, where I think that model is coming under pressure, whether it's Brazil, where we've had all kinds of political shenanigans, Russia, which is, very much Putin-dominated. Only India stands as a sort of democratic paradigm, in my view. From an economic point of view, I think the whole story's been overblown. We had a story of China leading, a locomotive leading these countries with its demand curve, but that demand curve has now slowed down. And it looks to me as a number of these countries look as if they're emperors without any clothes. Maybe it's because South Africa's close to home and we've had some incredible developments on the domestic political scene. Maybe that's what's sort of leading me to say, I don't see the paradigm, and it's time that we saw that paradigm. We can't keep talking about it. I agree the bank was a strong and powerful development, but the proof will be in the pudding. Where will the money go? How will it be allocated? Let's see. But beyond that, we've got to move beyond words. There have been a lot of great words. The acronym itself was great, BRICS, but now where is the beef?
Anastasia, all these countries have struggling economies, apart from India. Do you see any common desire, willingness for the countries to step in and support each other to develop this paradigm that Ali's searching for?
I don't think so. I'm afraid I'm quite pessimistic in that sense, because, as I said, there is much more divergence within the BRICS elements than convergence under this one particular acronym. It's as if they're trying to fit their own desires and geopolitical ambitions into a financial asset class that was created in 2001 by Goldman Sachs. But all these attempts, they've been slow, not particularly effective, and again, very sluggish. And in terms of their own ambitions for either global leadership or any influence on the international stage, essentially, if you look very closely at historical record, most of them achieved something and utilize it for their domestic political arenas only when they cooperate together with existing Western powers, with the US, with Europe, with international institutions. You can see it in Russia currently, you can see it in China consistently, including the climate change deal in Paris. You can see it in India, because Indian private capital controls a lot of assets in the West now, and it is a very important player for domestic politics, for example, here in the UK, especially post-Brexit. But all these channels are national. They project national vehicles, and they are taken as an emerging market, being that India, Russia. But together, I would agree with Ali on the previous point. There isn't much coherence in this paradigm, and I'm not even sure they're building that paradigm. They just gather together to talk, but I don't see any political will, desire, or a program to develop that alternative vision.
Okay. Sriram, we had the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi calling BRICS a vital pillar of hope at this conference, at this summit, a vital pillar of hope in today's economic world. I'm wondering, looking at all of the struggling economies there, apart from India's, which is growing and it's doing very well, is there any move within India to support its fellow members?
Yes, I think India can, whet the appetite of investors from these countries which are looking for opportunities to get favorable returns on investment. Prime Minister Modi, for example, the Russians are investing heavily in India's defense manufacturing, indigenous Make in India campaign of Prime Minister Modi. He's also, as I said, connecting BRICS with South Asian and Southeast Asian countries, and with India as a possible vector. So I think there are significant investment trade opportunities for the other countries. India remains, a consumer demand-driven market, and it has a lot to offer for countries that are struggling. We have a trade deficit with China, which is adverse in China's favor, and that's something we have been wanting to address. But some of the other countries we can surely import a lot more. But more than that, it's also about security. I mean, the way they've come out in Goa openly saying we need to dismantle havens and sanctuaries of terrorism, and have almost unequivocally condemned the attacks that happened from Pakistan against India recently in Kashmir. All these clearly show that there is also a parallel agenda. The national security advisors of all these countries are meeting. It's not just all economics. Even in security sphere, they're coming together. There's naval cooperation that's being mooted. There's intelligence sharing. We are forming, some kind of a BRICS identity, and BRICS Plus. I mean, we are also looking to engage other emerging market economies that have emerged more recently. So I think overall, it's a positive trend. I mean, the rise of the non-West is something we should not be dismissed. Okay. And just because some of these countries have become comatose right now doesn't mean that they have lost steam altogether. The fundamentals are still there, the demographics are still there, except Russia, and I think we'll bounce back in time to come.
Okay, I mean, as you say, Sriram, security was a key issue during this Goa conference. During the BRICS meeting, India's Prime Minister called on his counterparts to assist his country with the fight against terror. Narendra Modi said the most serious direct threat to our economic prosperity is terrorism. Tragically, its mothership is a country in India's neighbourhood. Ali, we all know which country that is. Narendra Modi didn't have to mention it by name. It is Pakistan. Are you surprised, though, by how much of this conference India used to focus its personal animosity with Pakistan, trying to call other BRICS nations in to rally behind it?
This is the point, Laura. I mean, it shows you that this was a very narrow, nationalistic Indian issue, a big Indian issue, but really an Indian issue. And I think it also put into stark contrast the geopolitical lack of alignment among these five countries. China, very aligned with Pakistan now, looking to compete with India in the Indian Ocean over the control of that Indian Ocean. And I think increasingly we're going to see divergence between India and China. Russia and India, long-term historical relationships.
If only India's hobby horse, then why would the other four sign up to such a strong declaration? Are they being led astray by India? Don't they have their own minds? I think it's a common concern. All the member states believe that terrorism is a problem. It's not just a narrow Indian concern whatsoever.
I agree
India's
with terrorism,
tried to convene and mobilize
the
multilateral and
terrorism in
interests,
Pakistan
to counter this. So I don't think it's just India imposing its will on the others. Rather,
no, but Sriram, India certainly focused its on Pakistan.
With respect, Sriram, I don't think everybody feels that Pakistan is the mothership of terrorism. I mean, there are other countries which are considered equally
Then why did the other four countries sign on to it? I mean, are they being...
It's an interesting,
are they not autonomous
actors? Development.
Okay, well, let's get Anastasia's point on that. Anastasia, why do you think there was agreement on this issue of terrorism there?
Is the question to me?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear. I think partly, again, there is a historical precedent of every host nation that would host either a BRICS summit or a G20 summit to use it for their domestic political agenda. So India is just one example of doing it. But I think it points, all the signatures on a declaration or an agreement, they point to one vital lack in this BRIC construction, and that's a principle of accountability. You can sign however many agreements and intentions and memorandums you can want, but if there is nobody to take you to account, it actually doesn't matter. So yes, terrorism is a global threat, and let's sign it for India, and maybe we will sign several business deals in parallel to, as a trade-off. But to be honest, if there is no control, checks and balances on the execution of this particular declaration or, fulfillment, it actually doesn't matter. It becomes very vacuous. So I wouldn't be taking it too seriously.
Okay. Do you think BRICS is likely to see better days, Anastasia, in the future?
I think it will continue to exist as an asset class. It's an important kind of economic reality or a financial reality because international companies, state strategies, they react to emerging markets through BRICS. It has assumed its own life. But in terms of this alternative institutional order, it's a far cry from what it could have been, maybe. But also, I don't think it being a viable and quick construct in the near future.
Okay, Sriram,
it will remain as a BRIC, but
yes.
It will not be a tangible alternative.
Okay, Sriram, your thoughts on that, BRICS' immediate future?
I think they've got to look at serious structural reforms, domestic reforms, also improved intra-BRICS trade and coordination. The infrastructure-based financing has already begun. The New Development Bank has lent close to $1 billion in its first year in existence, focused on renewable energy and such projects. I think they've got to build upon this success. There are, areas where we need to improve, and I'm not defending it as if it's perfect, but what I'm saying is this is the only means we have to be able to project power and to change the world order. And I don't think
thank you, Ali. Last word to you. We've got about a minute left. If we could just get your thoughts on whether BRICS has had its day.
Look, I think they were a tremendous phenomenon. I think, they've lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty. It's a tremendous achievement. But I think we now have geopolitical divergences. We have economic divergences where domestic policy making is coming to the fore. And across the board, I'm seeing a failure of economic policy making. I would say India least of all. But if I look at places like Brazil, China, people all accept China is now looking at some point as if it's going to pop. When it's going to pop big. So I think there are a lot of domestic concerns which I'd like these countries to focus on. As a phenomena, it remains there, but I don't think it will be the primary story.
Okay, fascinating to get all of your perspectives on this. Thank you all very much for joining us on Inside Story today. Sriram Chawla, Ali Khan Satchu and Anastasia Nesvetilova. And thank you too very much for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.